It's great to be here. Thanks for the English department for letting me give this presentation. This is maybe a little bit of a misnomer of the title. The business of writing for readers is really all about all writing and thinking about how can we best communicate with all of our readers. So my name is Ingram. I teach in the job training department here in a computer support technician program. But I find that writing is important no matter what areas you go into, whatever your discipline is or whatever career you have. We're all, it seems, required to communicate through a written word. And I've been passionate about writing all of my life. And in fact, even though I teach a computer class, my background is more in English and writing than anything else. So how I ended up teaching a computer class and getting involved in computers is kind of a winding road. But my bachelor's degree is in English with a professional writing concentration. I worked as a full-time journalist. I've written a number of books that have been used by industry, mostly by the computer industry, and then earned my MFA 2 summers ago. And the reason why I'm here is because writing is hard, and I suspect that probably for a number of us, writing is not necessarily always fun. And so I want to propose a method that I hope you will find fun and enjoyable, and also more rewarding, and not only more rewarding for you, but also more rewarding for the people who you are writing to or for. These are some of the, so I also have a bit of a business background as well. I've worked as a consultant, and these are some of the companies and organizations that I've helped over the years. So what I'd like to do is start off talking about life-changing writing, writing that has made your life better, writing that has caused you to see life differently than perhaps you did before you sat down and actually read whatever it is that you read. So what I'd like you to do right now is take that first card that is on the top that says it's the great writing card. And what I'd like you to do is describe what you consider to be great writing. So how do you see great writing? What does great writing mean to you? What does it look like? What does it feel like? Maybe even what does it smell like, especially for all the poets in the room? What's the texture of great writing? And what are some of the titles of works that you have read, or authors that you're super passionate about that have really contributed or even changed your life? And if you fill up one of these cards, just raise your hand and I'll get you another one. That would make my heart sore. Even if it was an email that was pinnacle to your life. Maybe it was even a blog post or something on a forum, or somebody posted something on your Facebook page that really made a difference for you. All of that counts. And even books from your childhood. So if you're, a super fan of Mercer Mayer or Dr. Seuss or somebody, include that and try and be as specific as possible. Okay. So when I was in my master's program, I basically learned, I learned a great deal of things, and it was an extremely rich experience. But if I were to somehow boil down what I learned into two things, it would be this. The first one has to do with really focusing on the writer. And the focus here was really around, here are ways in which you can improve your writing. And that was a way in which I think everybody who was in my program felt like there was a lot of attention being applied to each of us as an individual, and really working hard to figure out ways in which every writer was treated as an individual, and here are the specific things you need as an individual to become a better writer. And so it was deeply applicable, deeply rewarding, and I just learned a ton from doing that, and then hearing my fellow students talk about that. It was just a very enriching experience. On the other hand, the second thing was not about us as writers at all. On the other hand, it was all about the reader, and the reader as being someone who maybe we know, most likely someone who we don't know, and being able to think about them from sort of an arm's length reach about what are the things that they care about. And so this was all about, here are ways in which you may improve your reader's experience. And this is the part that I would really like to focus on this afternoon, which I really think about as the business of writing. Because if we're writing for one person, essentially what you're doing is you are creating a relationship with them. If you think about the things that you wrote down as far as great writing and what it meant to you, you probably feel like you have some kind of connection with the writer who you were reading. So this is all the math. It doesn't get any math intensive than this. But this is another concept that I learned, and you probably learned this as well, which is to say that less is more. And this quote actually stems from an architect, Mies van der Rohe, and who was just a famous minimalist. And if you think about less is more, this advice could just as easily apply to the craft of writing, using less words to say the same thing, if not more. Or it could also be something that I would say is deeply applicable to the reader, because what reader wants to read more words than necessary? If we're not being careful and considerate about our reader, we may be, I'm going to say, somewhat sloppy about our writing, and now we're asking our reader to do more work in order to engage in the writing, and that's doesn't really provide a very rich or rewarding experience for the reader. And so this is where I feel like this is kind of a merger between the two, and I think it's important to note that even simple statements like this, less is more, is just as applicable to the first phase as opposed to even the second phase. And so this is a quote from Tracy Chevalier. By using fewer words, I'm also giving readers a chance to fill the gaps in with their own. Less is more encourages collaboration, which is what a book should be, a contract between the writer and the reader. Now, if we look at this quote closely, and she's published quite a few works, probably best known for A Girl with a Pearl Earring. If I look at this quote and I say, okay, what part of this quote applies to the craft of writing, and which part of this quote applies to the business of writing, the business of writing for a reader, it would look something like this. Because she's talking about a contract right? She's using business language even though she's a literary writer. And so even if we were to describe what does less is more look like, how do we interpret this? Well, it's an economy of words. It's making each word provide value. It's making each word do work. It's making your writing worth reading. And just even these short statements are loaded with words that are typically used by the business world. And this I think is a wonderful, wonderful thing, because now you have really large companies all over the world that in the past, when they wanted to do better business, they were hiring people like MBAs. But according to Daniel Pink, who's a real leader in the business world, has some great TED Talks, if you like TED Talks. These companies are hiring MFAs, and I believe, as we'll sort of see here in a moment, it really has to do with MFAs' level of empathy for other people, which is not necessarily taught in business school. So I'd like you to think about the concept of writers are givers. We contribute content, we contribute narrative, we contribute ideas, thoughts, and feelings through our words. And so what I'd like you to do now is take that card that's marked number 1, and I'd like you to answer these questions on it. Why do you write? What do you want to share with one reader or give to the world? And what would you like to write about, or what would you write about that would give you the greatest joy? And I'm not going to ask you to share these cards with anybody else. These are your cards. So I'd like you to really take this opportunity to make it personal and make it be all about you and how you really feel, how you really think, what you really consider to be important to you in regard to writing. How might you make a difference for you or somebody else with your writing? And then on card number 2, I'd like you to think about readers as receivers. And now I want you to take off your writer hat and put on your reader hat and answer these questions. Why do you read? What value do you seek to receive when you read? And then if you could read anything, especially something that's never been written, what would it be? I mean, when you walk into a bookstore, when you walk into, let's say, Schuler's, and you're like, oh gosh, I want to pick up a book, but you're pretty sure that it's never been written, but this is the book you really want to read. What is that book? What's it about? Okay. So now what I'd like to do is talk about this process that I like to call the three-part pendulum method of writing. And the first part is really you focusing on you. You honoring yourself, you saying what it is that you want to say, you writing what you feel, what you think, what matters to you. But then after you go through that process, and you can make this very, very iterative, you can jot some things down that you're deeply passionate about, and then you can swing over to focusing on what your reader is seeking. And so when you think about this, of course, in a large part, this depends upon what are you writing? What is the format at which you are attempting to communicate? So is this an English lit paper? In that case, you know, who is your reader? Your reader is your professor. And knowing as much as you can about your professor and paying close attention to the things that they talk about as they explain what they consider to matter, that is the reader who you want to communicate with. And this isn't about appeasing anybody. This isn't about you know, trying to necessarily get a good grade and doing whatever it takes. This is really about respecting the person who is going to be taking the time to read your work. And that should carry forth with all of our communication, whether it's Facebook posts or whether it's email or Twitter. And then after you've really thought about the reader, then it's really about a merger of these two things. Because at times, and I'm sure you've experienced this, where you know you're going through a revision process of one kind or another, you can lose your way. I easily lose my way when I'm writing something if I'm deeply passionate about it, and then I think about who I'm writing it to, and then I focus more on the reader than perhaps what is really true to the vision of what it is that I want to say. It's important to then make sure that this is a blended world, that you are saying what is right for you to say, you are honoring your thoughts, your feelings, your beliefs, but at the same time making sure that you can communicate those ideas in a way that the reader is going to be receptive to it. So focusing on the writing, the first phase is really all about you. And these are, you know, I tried to pick topic ideas that are deeper than perhaps sort of first blush approaches, and really, you know, dive into some things that matter deeply to many of us. And then focusing on what the reader seeks. And so this is where, by practicing empathy, really thinking about how is the person who's going to be reading this, what do they think about, how do they feel, what matters to them, as best as you can. But you know, what I would argue is that as we look at frameworks for writing, empathy is something that I don't really hear many people talk about, and I would like to see that change, because there is another person on the other end who is going to be taking the time and the care to read your work. So whether it's English composition or poetry or a short story, or we could throw a whole bunch of other, you know, common elements associated with this type of writing, the one thing, again, we can get so focused on even things like grammar and sentence structure and paragraph order. But I think it's important to take a moment and say, okay, how's a person going to be feeling by paragraph 3? How's a person going to be feeling by paragraph 8? Have you really said something new or unique? Are they driven to keep reading, or are they starting to lose attention, lose focus based on whatever is happening through the writing? So this is all about the reader, and thinking about who might be reading it. And Are there things that you can leverage? Are there things that you can add? Are there things that you can modify to reach that reader at a deeper level so that it's more impactful? Is it something you can say or do through your writing that is going to widen the audience, to give it a broader approach when perhaps it might be too narrow? Or maybe it's too wide and it needs to be narrowed and deeper? And so again, this is just, kind of reiterating, focusing on you, then focusing on the reader, and then blending these two worlds together. And, what does that look like? So what does this mean? Well, if you choose to use this system, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to write your paper 3 times, but it's a way in which you can use as a lens, a series of lenses, to double check, is this communication effective? And how does it work? It's really a series of checks and balances, making sure that your writing perhaps is not too focused on you, that your reader is actually being addressed, that the things that your reader is actually looking for are present, which especially when you're taking classes and writing in a classroom situation, that's extremely important. And so what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to imagine using the system right now. So on your card, what I'd like you to do is put your great writing card at the center. Take the card that you wrote that's all about what it is that you want to write about, put that to the left, and then take the card that you wrote for your reader, or you as a reader, and think about blending these. If you blend these, and you can use your third card for this, what does that look like? Is this perhaps your next writing project? Do you have an idea for your next paper? Do you have an idea about how you could have improved a paper that maybe you just recently submitted? And if you really want to shake things up, take your reader card and exchange it with the person sitting next to you. Because this is a great way to find out what someone else who's sitting right next to you cares about. That is the thing that they want to read. That is what they are seeking. That is a way in which you can perhaps expand your approach to writing to reach someone who is essentially handing you a card that says, this is what motivates me. This is what I would like to get out of reading when I sit down and read something. Now, I think there's a good question to ask, which is, can this system lead us astray? Can it go too far? Can it go not far enough? And of course, the answer is yes. So the benefits of the system really are making sure that you stay within a certain range. Because if you go too far to the left, even though I'm actively supporting an approach that's really individualistic and it is self-focused, that can go too far to the left, just like if you are too empathetic and if you are too reader-focused, that can also turn into extremely poor writing. And so if you stay to the left, your writer's voice and tone is certainly going to be distinct. However, it may also come off as being completely egotistical and self-serving. And I think that the publishing world helps weed these things out, but I'm sure from time to time we've been asked to read things where it's like, this is almost like reading concrete. This is so dense, it is so difficult, it is so overwritten that there's almost no room for the reader to engage what it is that's being communicated in a written way. Now, going too far to the right is just as bad, and that is where the writer's tone is almost non-existent, where the writer and the name of the writer could just be easily swapped out with someone else, and the reader would never even know it. And that would be an example of that, or the word I like to use with that is, that's pandering. That's absolutely pandering. And you don't want to do that either. And I'm sure we can think of, unfortunately, examples of authors where that is what a lot of things are getting published today, is this, to the point where some very, very published authors, they are not writing the books themselves. Other people are writing the books, and the reader can't distinguish from who's the ghostwriter or who's the assistant writer. Exactly, exactly. Michael Chabon, quote, Louis Pasteur said, "Chance favors the prepared mind. If you're really engaged in the writing, you'll work yourself out of whatever jam you find yourself in." And Michael Chabon is well known for many works. And of course, the one that he's most famous for is The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, which he won a Pulitzer Prize for. And I'd just like to take a moment and just watch this video. And what I'd like you to do is we're just gonna watch the interviewer from Time Magazine ask 2 questions. And I'm less interested in how we feel about Michael Chabon's answer and more interested in the questions and the tone of the interviewer, okay? And why, I'm interested in Michael Chabon's answers, of course, deeply interested in his answers, but from the standpoint of what we're doing in here right now, the interviewer is representing the reader. And she is, I think, being very revealing about what she thinks and how she feels about this, at the time, new book called Telegraph Avenue.
Michael Chabon has won several literary prizes, including a Pulitzer and a Hugo. He's also the writer of a number of movies, including the spectacularly high-grossing Spider-Man 2 and the spectacularly low-grossing John Carter. His newest book, Telegraph Avenue, is about a record store and fatherhood and forgiveness and midwifery and race. And he's here to talk about it. Thanks for being here, Mr. Chabon.
Oh, I'm delighted. Thank you, Belinda.
So, in the middle of this book, it's book 3, there is a section that is 12 pages long, and it's just one sentence. Are you showing off?
And remember the quote, right? You can write yourself into a problem, but if you are well prepared, you can figure out an answer. And so I'd also like you to listen really close to his answer.
Showing off?
If all I wanted to do was show off, I wouldn't have done it. I would have restrained myself. I really did feel that I needed to find a solution to a problem, to an artistic problem. And I had a sense that the reader might want to know just, okay, where are we right now before we proceed to the second part of this book? It all just came together in my mind. I'm just going to try to do a single take, essentially, a tracking shot in the form of a sentence, and it ended up being about 4,000 words.
What do you think her opinion is of that answer? And I want you to just think about that. Was he successful? And as far as, I don't know, the vim and the vigor of her question, was that at all appeased?
the central character in this book, or one of the central characters, Archie Stallings, is black. And I'm sure you're getting asked this question a lot, but didn't you feel a little anxious writing from the point of view of the black guy?
Not while I was writing, I didn't. While I was actually doing the writing itself, sitting in my chair at the computer, putting myself into the mind and the heart and the life of whether it was Archie or Gwen or whoever it might have been, I didn't have any doubts or anxieties at all about it. The challenge is always the same, which is, can you imagine what it's like to be somebody else or not?
That's true, but the thing about race is that it's a much more charged subject.
So this is a wonderful interview, and I really encourage you to watch the rest of it. But what is he talking about in that second answer? Right? He's talking about empathy. He's talking about empathy. Now the question, though, that I want to come back to is, in Belinda's opinion, and based on these questions, was he successful? Is he being successful at being empathetic in reaching her or any number of people who are reading the book? Is that successful? So again, the first question is, are you showing off? 12 pages, one sentence, which he says is over 4,000 words. Did it really need to go that way? And then the second question really has to do with race, and is he being empathetic enough? Does he really approach the writing in a way that respects people of another culture, people of another background, and is it empathetic? I wanted to provide some examples of this because all writing is different, and we need to be cognizant of this. So as far as individualistic self-focus, we expect a diary to be individualistic. In fact, I would say that a diary or a journal, in fact, should probably be extremely self-serving. It should probably be very egotistical, very perhaps even overly self-focused. And that's perfectly fine because it's probably not really intended for anybody else to read. It's really for the writer, and as they're processing their thoughts, their feelings, and so on. Tweets, memoirs, autobiographies, I think tend to be individualistic, self-focused, but not so far over to the left. I put poetry in the middle, but poetry could really go anywhere. Poetry, and I love poetry, and poetry can be extremely successful anywhere. Literary fiction, right? Strong voice. Literary fiction. The voice is so distinctive, the tone is so distinctive, you can recognize the author, especially if you love the author, if you really appreciate their writing. All you really need is a sentence or two, and you can pick that up immediately. But things like business writing, biography, popular fiction, journalism, and having been a journalist, and if you've been through journalism classes, if you've worked as a journalist, you know that you've received training and you've been told over and over again, you cannot do this with your journalism, right? You must be removed. You must provide an objective viewpoint in order for journalism to be successful. And as far as, having, almost no voice, and these are things I've done as well, like technical writing, there should not be any reflection, anything having to do with the author when you're doing technical writing or a research paper. It should be completely removed. So then the question I have for you is, where would you classify a crime novel? Where would you put a crime novel in this pendulum? Would it go to the middle? Would it go to the left? Would it go to the right?
I'd go to the right.
Go to the right?
It's empathetic.
Yeah.
Because you want to
Absolutely, yes.
It can also be self-serving because the investigator, if it's like, crime and it's the investigator, then he can like talk about his feelings on the crime and what's happening.
That's right, and it could be a reflection of the author's viewpoint around a specific crime or something like that. Yeah, absolutely. And so there's two opinions, and they're equally valid. They're equally valid, right? So yesterday, Marlon James won a Booker Prize. This is a real honor. This is a real achievement, and it's about a crime novel. He won the Booker Award for a crime novel. That is not usually the type of book that receives this level of an award, but it's because of his approach. It's because of the material, how he handled the material, and I would argue a perfect balance between being an individualistic writer and being respectful and empathetic for the reader. So if we take a look at this quote, as he won this award yesterday, "My turning point as a writer was when a friend of mine handed me Salman Rushdie's novel, Shame," he said. "And I remember reading it and being so appalled by it. The idea that those things were possible in fiction just never occurred to me." Well, let's break down this quote. Here he is talking as a writer. And here he is talking as a reader. And we do this, I think, subconsciously. And what I'm attempting to do in talking about this is somehow creating some distinction where I think rarely there is any, but I think there's huge value in noticing these things. He goes on, but James said, "If anybody shaped my literary sensibility, it was my dad," which is funny because my dad never read fiction. His father preferred Coleridge and used to challenge his son to Shakespeare reciting contests. He shaped my love of books. And so I think that's an important thing to think about as well. And that's also why I asked you, what do you love to read? What are the things that you are moved by? What motivates you to read? What motivates you to write? And what would make a perfect book for you to read, especially one that you're pretty sure has never been written? That's the book that I would love to see you write. That's the book that I think other people would also like to read. James noted that 10 years ago he had given up on writing, but was encouraged to persist by a visiting American teacher named Kaylee Jones. He managed to reclaim an abandoned manuscript from an old laptop to begin again. How cool is that? So even the things that we think aren't worth pursuing, the things that we think this won't be successful, we could be wrong. And sometimes it takes another voice, it takes another reader, it takes a reader to help point that out. So I also wanted to provide some tools, psychological frameworks, in which you can reach readers and think about, as human beings, what are the things that we care about? And so this is Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. A number of years ago, a scientist named Maslow said, in order to best understand humans and for humans to reach higher levels of self-actualization, we really need to determine what sort of things need to be met first before these other things can come into play. And so things like breathing, food, water, and then security, and then friendship and family, self-esteem, confidence. As long as these needs are met, then we can get to this higher level of morality and creativity and problem solving and spontaneity, and those things matter just as much. But these things, nobody cares about these things if these things aren't being met. So with your writing, if you want to deeply reach a reader and grab them and not let go, these are topics. These are issues that it's all about being human. And none of us can survive without these. Another one is, very famous Myers-Briggs personality test. When you want to create characters, when you want to create personas, when you want to think about even readers, how might an ENFP view this work? How might an ESTJ view this work? How might an ISTJ view this work? That is another lens or another foil through which we can confirm or guess or postulate. I'm not so sure this person with this personality type may or may not get what it is that I'm trying to convey. Another one is the big 5 personality traits. And so the theory here is that every one of us in this room has one of these things as our dominant personality trait, with other ones being, minor influences in our personality. And so to base characters, base our thoughts and empathy around readers in this regard, I think can also be just super helpful. Disc model, just another approach to this. And so the idea is not to use all of these. The idea is to show that there's lots of frameworks that are available. There's lots of ways in which we can approach writing, approach our audience, and to use these if they seem to make sense. Here's Strength Finders, which has just been really, really popular. And again, there's no one of us in here is just one of these things, but we are a combination of these things. We're a mixture of these things. And I was thinking we were going until 4:30, but we're not. We're going until 4:15, aren't we? Questions? Was this helpful? Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful. If you want to reach me, you can reach me at Ingram, MINGRAM, @grcc.edu. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And I guess I'd just like to say it's never too late to read. It's never too late to write. And it's never too late to begin again. Allow yourself to be inspired with all the good that's in the world. Allow yourself to be inspired by all the things that are atrocious about the world as well. And thanks very much.